A new battle with free speech has emerged. This week, we reported on how PayPal had closed the accounts of the Daily Skeptic, of the Free Speech Union, of Us for Them. And now we're seeing not only censorship within the big tech platforms from content that's being censored, but now we're seeing people being demonetized as well as deplatformed. And this isn't just organizations, it's also individuals who have been challenging grand narrative. So I'm delighted to be joined today by Toby Young, who will be joining us in a moment, who's the founder of the Free Speech Union and the Daily Skeptic. And he'll be explaining exactly what happened to his organizations and what he's been able to do to fight back, but also discuss some of the broader concerns that we're witnessing with this particular issue. So, Toby, it's great to have you here on the Elevate podcast with us. We're 12 months on. You contributed to our lockdown summit in June 2021, but the shenanigans are still unfolding, it seems.
They are, yes. I think demonetizing people for purely political reasons is the new front line in the ongoing war on free speech. We see this kind of thing in China all the time. It's how the Chinese Communist authorities control the population via the social credit system, with people who say something that antagonizes the communist authorities losing access to banking facilities and literally not being able to buy groceries. But we're beginning to see the rollout of a Chinese-style social credit system now across the West, except instead of the communist authorities being the enforcers of ideological conformity, it's woke capitalist corporations like PayPal.
Indeed. Now, I'm sure many of our viewers will be already well familiar with certainly the Daily Skeptic and perhaps the Free Speech Union as well. Could you just tell us a little bit about both of your organizations and why you started them? And then we'll hear a little bit about your story and how they've been affected this week by PayPal.
Sure. So I set up the Free Speech Union in February of 2020 to defend free speech. It's a non-partisan membership organization, and membership fees start as low as £2.49 a month. And if someone then comes for you, if a cancel mob comes for you, then we'll have your back. But in addition, we put on events. So we had a book launch for Andrew Doyle, in which I interviewed him on stage a couple of days ago. We've got events coming up with Neil Oliver. We've got a Christmas party at Comedy Unleashed. And we also publish FAQs on the Free Speech Union's website on things like what to do if your employer wants you to declare your gender pronouns in the workplace and you don't want to do that. What are your rights? The Daily Skeptic I set up not long afterwards, actually. I set it up in April of 2020, and I set it up because I wrote a couple of pieces questioning the wisdom of the lockdown policy and associated COVID restrictions, and was immediately piled on and monstered. I realized how difficult it was to kind of write openly about the lockdown and associated restrictions. If you had any reservations about it, it became taboo to voice those reservations. So I set up what was then Lockdown Skeptics, a website where I and others were able to openly share our reservations about the policy. And it became a kind of hub for skeptics, lockdown skeptics. A lot of people told me that going to the site kept them sane because they thought they were the only ones who were skeptical. And it was great to discover that there were some other skeptics out there. And since the COVID restrictions were lifted on July 19th of last year, Freedom Day, we turned it into the Daily Skeptic. And we're now skeptical about other policies that are supposedly informed by the science, like net zero.
Much needed. It seems like you had a premonition that you would need the Free Speech Union if you launched that ahead of the Daily Skeptic. Quite clearly, we've seen an assault on free speech. We've seen the cancel culture running rife during the course of the pandemic. And we've seen all kinds of challenges of the science getting through in terms of the real science, the objective science that's been shared through means like the Daily Skeptic, etc. But I wouldn't have imagined 12 months ago or 2 years ago that we'd be seeing not only major platforms deplatforming and canceling authors, scientists, experts, but now PayPal bringing demonetization as a new way of deplatforming. Could you tell us a little bit about how you found out that the Daily Skeptic, the Free Speech Union, and your personal PayPal were being suspended. How did you get the news?
I received an email from PayPal telling me that the accounts had been permanently closed. And the reason in each case was that the account in question had breached the acceptable use policy. No more detail than that. And I obviously appealed the decisions. That was unsuccessful. I complained. That was unsuccessful. I wrote to the CEO of PayPal UK. He didn't reply. I got in touch with the corporate affairs departments, both in the UK and the US of PayPal. Couldn't get a response out of them. Initially, when they eventually did come back and offer some explanation, they quoted their policy against promoting hate, violence, or racial intolerance. And now, quite what they were thinking of there, I'm not sure. I mean, the Daily Skeptic's never done anything like that. The Free Speech Union hasn't. But you know, hate can be a kind of catch-all term now to describe an opinion you disagree with. So at the Free Speech Union, for instance, we've defended lots of feminists who've been deplatformed for hate speech after saying things like women don't have penises. You know, that's now described as hate speech. So I suppose it's possible that, you know, personally, I've been guilty of hate speech, if that's hate speech. But then they changed their minds and came up with a different reason. So when the Times called them to find out why they demonetized me and my two organizations, someone from PayPal told the Times journalist that it was because the Daily Skeptic was spreading COVID-19 vaccine misinformation. And I suppose that could be the reason why the site was demonetized. And maybe the other two sites were demonetized, or the other two accounts were closed because of my links to all three. Maybe the Daily Skeptic was the original sinner. But as we know, Dan, misinformation, well, anyone who raises the slightest reservations about the efficacy and safety of the mRNA vaccines, however mild and however scientifically well informed, even if you are a qualified scientist, is immediately accused of trafficking in misinformation and conspiracy theories. So perhaps that was the reason. But then it was hard to know. They were completely unclear, and it was impossible to get a kind of straight answer out of them.
It reminds me of a painful breakup that I went through about 10 years ago when I really tried to find out what I did to deserve the ceasing of our relationship, and I never got an answer. And it sounds like you're in a similar position.
Yeah.
But you know, you are obviously using these services to help fund the work that you're doing and the important work that you're doing both with the Daily Skeptic and the Free Speech Union. What kind of impact has that had, not on just you, but your members?
Yeah, well, it was hugely disruptive. So about a quarter of the regular donors to the Daily Skeptic. The Daily Skeptic survived. We employ 4 or 5 people, and we're only able to survive because people, you know, make monthly donations of £5, £10, and about a quarter of those donations were affected because they were using PayPal to process those donations. But it was worse in the case of the Free Speech Union because about a third of our 9,500 or so members were using PayPal to process their recurring membership dues. So, you know, that was a third of our income at stake. So we had to contact all the donors to the Daily Skeptic and all the members of the Free Speech Union that were affected and ask them to switch to a different payment processor. And inevitably, you know, some people didn't bother to open the email. Some people did, but thought it was a phishing scam. And so, you know, inevitably we're gonna lose revenue as a result of this.
Yeah, it's very tricky. I mean, we've also going to be taking a stand. You know, we're using PayPal like many of us are in this space. It's a convenient way to accept payments. At least it used to be. And we take that risk because we have to take a stand for free speech. So we'll be making a statement about our members too. But we run the risk, you know, like yourself, we've got a team that we pay, and things like this are a huge problem. Now, you didn't get a clear reason why they were taken down. You can speculate, but looking more broadly, you know, Us for Them were affected, Law or Fiction, various other, the UK Medical Freedom Alliance, various other COVID and related skeptic groups. Do you think this is politically or ideologically driven by PayPal?
Yes, I think it is. I don't think there can be much doubt about that. If you look at the sites they've closed the accounts of, they're all, saying what's become unsayable. So often it's because they've, raised doubts about the efficacy and safety of the COVID vaccines. That's just not allowed now. In some cases, it's because they've been skeptical about the so-called climate emergency. A couple of sites in the US were closed by PayPal, or rather their accounts were closed by PayPal back in May of this year. And they were both left-wing sites, not conservative sites, but they were skeptical about the war in Ukraine. That's another sacred cow you're not allowed to touch. I think there are these key issues which if you express skepticism about the kind of orthodox progressive view, and in not every case the progressive view, just the orthodox view, then you risk being no platformed, demonetized, cancelled. And I think we evidently crossed some of those lines on the Daily Skeptic and even at the Free Speech Union. I mean, it was remarkable that they no platformed the Free Speech Union, because we don't actually express contentious points of view. We just defend people who get into trouble for saying something perfectly lawful but a bit contentious. Apparently, even that now is beyond the pale.
Well, it seems to me to be this unfolding escalation of cancel culture, but more so this Orwellian dystopian reality where the thought police now come in the form of big tech, and it's not limited to the platforms that distribute information, but those that now are responsible for collecting payments from these both individuals, organizations, and platforms. What do you think this means for free speech more broadly right now? What kind of challenges are we facing here?
Well, I think it's absolutely critical that we nip in the bud the emergence of a Chinese-style social credit system in the West. We saw how governments can abuse the banking system to shut down perfectly legitimate protests. We saw that in Canada earlier this year when Justin Trudeau persuaded various Canadian banks to freeze the bank accounts of the truckers participating in the Freedom Convoy. Unless we nip this in the bud, we're going to see more and more of that. So we really need to stop it. What the Free Speech Union has been doing has been lobbying the government to change the law so it becomes illegal for financial services companies to close the accounts or refuse to open accounts for individuals or organizations for purely political reasons, provided their political views are perfectly lawful. I think we're making some headway. We're looking for a bill currently going through Parliament that we can easily amend. And we've got a team of top lawyers working on that amendment. We hope to have something ready by next week. But I think that is the way to fight this. It's only through legislation, by getting politicians, lawmakers on side, that we can actually stop the emergence of a social credit system in the West, because, our freedom of speech is at stake. And without freedom of speech, all the other freedoms fall. So it's absolutely vital we defend it. And this is the front line at the moment.
I suppose the silver lining from this situation is the stir that it's caused politically. We've seen many contentious issues over the last couple of years that have been, wouldn't be touched with a barge pole by the politicians or the mainstream media, no matter how valid or damning those issues are. But here we've seen the mainstream media jump on this. We've seen politicians, backbenchers, jumping to this situation. And it does look like there is a possible road for some form of action, at least on a local level in the UK.
Yes, I think that's right, Dan. And it was because of the almighty fuss that was made about PayPal's cancellation of my 3 accounts that PayPal eventually did a reverse ferret. So on Tuesday of this week at about 5:30 p.m., I got 3 new emails from PayPal telling me that in each case my accounts had been restored. And the email said that, we've now carried out a review of your accounts, and thanks to input from our stakeholders, we have decided to restore them all. It was like there was nothing about trafficking in COVID misinformation or spreading hate anymore. And even though they'd originally said they'd permanently close them, now apparently they were only ever under review. And I think what they mean by input is that tens of thousands of people, I think, out of solidarity with the Free Speech Union and the Daily Skeptic, closed their PayPal accounts and let PayPal know exactly why they were doing it. Tens of thousands sounds like an exaggeration, but I think it might be as high as that. I got thousands of messages via Twitter, Facebook, email from people, comments on the Daily Skeptic, people telling me that they had closed their PayPal accounts and given PayPal a piece of their minds. And I think in the end, that was very effective, as well as questions being asked in the House of Commons and, members of the government saying they thought something should be done about this, like Jacob Rees-Mogg. But, it shouldn't require that level of fuss before you can get a decent response, before a complaint, an appeal to a company like PayPal is taken seriously. I mean, we all know when you're demonetized, kicked off one of these platforms, it's incredibly hard to get a straight answer out of these corporations. I mean, often they don't even respond to your emails, or you get something so generic and pro forma, it's incomprehensible. And it shouldn't be that way. And of course, we're not going to start using PayPal again until PayPal restores the accounts of all the other organizations and individuals it's closed for purely political reasons, and promises never to do it again, which I don't suppose it will, which means we're going to crack on with lobbying for a law to prevent this kind of thing happening to other people in future.
Well, I think that's the important thing, because you've clearly sent a warning shot to not just PayPal, but hopefully their competitors as well. The consumer power that you've witnessed here I think is really important. Is that when you do stand up for your rights, there is plausible solutions, and I think the wider piece is the law, which I think if that passes in the UK, that gives us some protection. But as we know, PayPal, global organization, I think they're currently in the European headquarters or in Switzerland. I may be incorrect there, but
Luxembourg, I think.
Luxembourg. Okay, but we've got the difficulty is this could continue across borders, and I think with companies like Twitter and social media, they're global companies, and they seem to operate by a different set of rules that we can see legislation in our own nation, but ultimately it feels like the West is facing an erosion of free speech and other freedoms. It's not limited to the United Kingdom. This is not an issue that we're facing alone. What do you think the longer term prognosis is here?
Well, I don't think it's very good, Dan. We may succeed in getting the law changed in the UK, which protects people or offers them a bit more protection than they have at present from being demonetized, being locked out of of their bank accounts and having banking facilities withdrawn from them. We may make some headway, but as you say, it isn't a problem isolated to the UK. It's a global problem, and it is quite difficult holding these vast multinational corporations to account. If PayPal was headquartered in the UK, then what they did might have been unlawful under the Equality Act, because it's unlawful to discriminate against people on the basis of protected characteristics, and religious and philosophical beliefs are protected characteristics. So we might have been able to bring a case against PayPal via the Equality Act had they been based in the UK. But as you say, they're not. They're based in Luxembourg, which makes it much more difficult. And Texas passed a law, I think, last year, making it illegal for social media platforms to kick people off for purely political reasons, provided their political views were perfectly lawful. And that was challenged in court only last week, and the court upheld the law, and it looks like that'll now be challenged in the Supreme Court. But if the Supreme Court upholds that law, I think that may herald some progress. We really have to, we have to do everything in our power, and I think it must ultimately mean changing the law in as many different jurisdictions as possible to stop big tech companies from discriminating against people on the basis of their political views. My political views should be a matter of utter indifference to my bankers, as well as to, Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and the rest of them. Provided they're lawful, then they should be of no interest to those organizations. And we need to change the law so they stop discriminating against people for expressing perfectly lawful points of view.
100% agree. I suppose I agree. I think that's where there is opportunity. I suppose my concern is, in the world that we're living right now, the global machine is not limited to big tech. It seems pervasive across, global institutions, global politics. And my fear is that, whilst we could take proactive action to put these types of laws in place, I wouldn't be surprised to see some of these vague definitions of hate speech and defamation, the Anti-Defamation League, which is involved with PayPal, and some of these broader subjective terms becoming entwined in law, where it actually gives greater power to big tech. My worry is that it could go the other way without pressure.
Yeah, it is already going the other way. So the online safety bill, which is currently on hold, but it's going to be resurrected, unfortunately, that requires, at the moment, unless it's amended, and we hope it will be, but no guarantee, that requires social media companies like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube to stipulate in their terms and conditions how they're going to address what the government calls legal but harmful to adults content. And the government is going to, in the form of a statutory instrument, come up with a list of content it regards as legal but harmful to adults. And on the indicative list that the government published, or at least the last government published before the bill was put on hold, it included the term health-related misinformation. And you and I know that means anyone expressing the slightest reservations about the COVID-19 vaccines would automatically be kicked off social media platforms. They are at the moment, but this would make, I think, it even worse than it is at present. So, the Free Speech Union has been lobbying hard against the online safety bill. I was delighted when it was put on hold. I'm now nervous that it's going to be brought back. And I hope that if it is brought back, at the very least, the legal but harmful clause 13, is stripped out.
Well, absolutely. I mean, it's just so subjective. It seems like we live in a world now where some individual's emotional or mental vulnerabilities becomes all of our responsibilities. If someone knows they are triggered by certain information, how does that become the society's responsibility to curtail their speech? Because ultimately, we're then only ever able to speak to the lowest common denominator when it comes to one's own kind of mental, emotional security.
Well, Dan, there's a clause in the online safety bill which I'd like to see go as well, which would introduce a new harmful communications offence, whereby if you cause someone extreme psychological distress as a result of communicating with them, possibly via Twitter or Facebook. So, anyone who sees your tweet, if they are caused extreme psychological distress by what you've said, then you could go to prison for up to 2 years under this new offense. And as you say, someone somewhere is probably going to take offense, at something you say. Why should everyone be held hostage by the most psychologically fragile? And, we also know that plenty of people will weaponize their, pretended psychological fragility in order to shut down speech they find disagreeable. They'll claim, we saw that earlier this year at South College at the University of Durham. Timothy Luckhurst, the head of that college, invited Rod Liddle to give an after-dinner speech, and lots of these students walked out and claimed afterwards that the mere fact that Rod Liddle had been invited to give an after-dinner speech made them feel unsafe. And instead of, laughing in their faces, the university authorities took that very seriously and suspended Timothy Luckhurst and placed him under investigation. Absolutely ridiculous. But we see that kind of thing happening all the time. Political activists weaponizing their pretended psychological fragility in order to shut down the speech of anyone they find even slightly disagreeable.
I mean, it's so subjective. I mean, I suppose on the flip side, if this thing does pass, we could all take our collective trauma from the offense that we've taken from the government's response to COVID-19 and channel that into a gigantic legal case, saying we're woefully offended by the government and their actions, and therefore we should.
Unfortunately, that wouldn't be taken seriously, as we know. You can't, if you claim to be offended or upset or mentally unbalanced in some way by the expression of woke progressive views, then that doesn't count. You don't get anywhere. It's only if you get offended by the expression of right of centre views that your feelings are taken seriously.
Yeah, it's a worrying time. Now you've taken action, of course, with your campaign, and we've also joined your campaign at the Free Speech Union, which you can find at the freespeechunion.org/take-action. Encourage our viewers today to join that, to write to your MP and express your dissatisfaction here. This is, regardless of your own political views, it's not about our own positions on the matter. To me, this is a principle and a fundamental component of living in a free and democratic world. So we must take a stand here whilst we have the opportunity to do so. So I encourage you to join the campaign. Toby, is there any other action you think we could take? Obviously, you've mentioned about the kind of legal action and political action, to address this broader set of concerns. Is there other things, other solutions that you could see at our fingertips to kind of curtail this creeping erosion of our freedoms?
Yeah, there are some free market solutions, so we can withhold our custom from companies that behave like this. Instead of going on Twitter, go on Getter. Instead of using PayPal, use Stripe, which seems to be a little bit less biased and a little less likely to cancel people for having, the wrong opinions. So I think, there are opportunities here. I mean, one of the reasons the Daily Skeptic has been so successful, and I think we're going to have our most successful month ever this month. We're already over 2 million page views for the month, which is a record for us. But the reason it's so successful is because people are fed up with not being told the truth in the mainstream media. So there are market solutions. There is, I think, a real appetite for genuinely liberal values, whether embedded in a payment processing system or on a website. So, I think there is some hope there.
Toby, it's been great speaking with you today, and thank you for taking up the fight. It's, without your story, as harmful as it was at the time, I think we've started to move forward in really maintaining our free speech, and it's important that this continues because we know it's just an increasing problem. I saw this morning, in fact, the new Italian Prime Minister. If you search her name on Twitter now, you can't find any photos or videos because there was the viral clip from 2019 of her denouncing the kind of progressive way that's becoming kind of part of the globalist narrative. And YouTube have taken her videos down, Twitter have taken down all videos featuring the new Italian Prime Minister. It's just a crazy world.
It is extraordinary, isn't it? I mean, if they can cancel someone who's just won a general election, then they can certainly cancel you. And the other thing people should do, they should really think seriously about joining the Free Speech Union. As I say, the membership fees start at £2.49 a month. If an outrage mob comes for you, and don't be too sure they won't, we'll have your back.
Fantastic. Thank you, Toby. It's great having you here once again on the Elevate podcast. I'll just close out now. So just to let you know, coming up in the next week, we have an online course looking at digital assets and how you can actually use decentralized technologies to overcome some of these centralized problems. If you'd like to find out more about that program, you can go to danastingregory.com/digital assets. You can find out about some of the specific alternatives to PayPal that offer you the opportunity to take freedom of speech into your own hands when it comes to the different platforms that are available to us. And as I mentioned, we'll be making a statement ourselves tomorrow morning about our PayPal account, because again, we've been moved by this, and we'll be closing down our PayPal accounts and warning all of our subscribers that we'll need to take action. So it's important to take the power into our own hands, and I encourage anyone at home who's currently using PayPal. There are plenty of alternatives, and we'll be sharing some of those alternatives as part of our event next week, but also to our mailing list. So thanks again, Toby, and thanks to our audience who tuned in live. Please do share this episode. And every time we have a conversation about a topic that goes against the narrative, we know that our platforms are under threat. We're still broadcasting on YouTube. We got a strike last week for talking about vaccines, unsurprisingly. So if you're not yet on our mailing list, please head over to danastingregory.com/podcast. Join our mailing list to stay up to date. And I encourage you to go ahead and go to the Free Speech Union and check out the Daily Skeptic. The Daily Skeptic's been an incredible source for us at the Pandemic Podcast over the last couple of years. So please do help Toby go well in excess of that 2 million page views, and congratulations for your progress this month. And thanks again for all the work you've been doing to protect our free speech.
Thanks, Dan.